In this video, I'm going to walk you through the steps of how to compute the 95% confidence interval for the mean. So this is a technique that we use to compare means of some value in two groups. So I'm going back to one of my starting examples, the one that had the group structure. So if you remember, the hypothesis here was if age influences the effectiveness of this immortality drug I'm investigating, then I expect younger patients to experience greater immortality because their bodies are in better condition when they start the treatment. All right, so obviously this is a fictitious example, right? So I need to compute kind of a list of statistics here. So I'm going to copy over my list, and at any point you can pause the video to type and catch up. So here's the list I want to go with. I'm going to make this a little wider so we can see it. And then I'm going to crunch my column a little bit here so we can almost see it. Okay, so I lost my good column headings here, but this was my old person column and this was my young person column, just for reference. All right, so these are the statistics I'm going to be computing: the average, the standard deviation, the sample size, the standard error, the 95% confidence interval increment. Get the right color there. Nope, that wasn't it. Sorry. And then a lower confidence limit and an upper confidence limit. And then I'll make a separate video to talk about how we interpret the values for these. All right, so we're going to take advantage of some of the built-in functions in Excel. And again, anytime you need to pause and catch up, definitely do that. I'm just going to blast right ahead here. So in order to compute the average, I'm going to do this right below each column. So I'm going to start by typing the equal sign, and that just alerts Excel to the fact I'm about to ask it to do some math. Like I said, there are built-in functions for some of these. There's definitely a built-in function to compute an average, and the name of that is just average. So I write equals and then average. And then whenever I put in a function, I need to include in parentheses after the function the cell or the range of cells that I want Excel to compute this function on. So here's my open parenthesis, and then all I need to do is just highlight the cells that have the data I want to be averaged. So in this case, in my example here, I've got 5 data points, so I'm just going to highlight all those. I know they're highlighted because there's that moving dotted line around them. And I can also check it's put in C2 colon C6, and that means it's taking the values found in cell C2, and colon means a range, and that's ranging all the way down to C6. So I could type that in directly too. I like to click and drag, especially if there are a lot of numbers. Once I have that, I'm just going to close my parentheses and hit enter. And boom, I've got an average of 97.4 from my old patient's survival. All right, so the next thing is going to be the standard deviation. So again, there's a built-in function there. So once again, I'm going to start by typing equals, and then STDEV is the name of the standard deviation function. And then just like I did in the previous step, I need to put in an open parenthesis. And then I am going to highlight my 5 values. I want to make sure that I don't accidentally include my average in that. It would be good to have some visual separation there. I can do that in a second. But I should have C2 to C6 in my particular case here. Your cell range may be different depending on where your data are and how much you have of it. All right, and then I'm going to hit the close parentheses and enter, and my standard deviation ends up being 1.968, blah, blah, blah. All right, like I said, I want to put a little visual separation here. So I think what I'll do is I'll draw a nice thick box around my statistics here. All right, so you don't have to do that step. That's just to help me make sure I don't accidentally highlight my average. I'm kind of condensing everything so that I can make it big on my screen so that you guys can see it well. All right, next I need my sample size. So that's the number of measurements that are contributing to these different statistics I just calculated. It's a small data set. It's easy. I could just type in 5, You may have more data in your data set, so I can use a function to do this as well. So again, equal sign, and the name of the function is just count. It's going to count the number of cells I highlight. So count, and then open parenthesis, same thing. I'm going to highlight those 5 values right there. Then I'm going to close my parenthesis and hit enter. And just as I expected, my sample size is 5. All right, now we get into territory where Excel does not have built-in functions. So unfortunately, I need the standard error in order to compute my 95% confidence interval. Standard error is simple to calculate. It's just the standard deviation divided by the square root of the sample size. But again, I can have Excel do the hard bits of that. So I'm going to actually type this one out. So once again, I start with an equal sign to tell Excel it needs to do some math. And then I'm just going to click on my cell that contains my standard deviation here. So that for me, that happens to be cell C8. So that's what should be here. And then to do division, I'm just going to hit the, I think that's the /. It's the one that leans forward, right? So I want to divide my standard deviation by the square root of the sample size. So there is a function to compute square root. It's simply SQRT, the squirt function. And then as always, I have to have an open parenthesis, and I have to indicate what I want the square root of, which in this case is my sample size number of 5. So that happens to be in cell C9 for me. Then I can just close the parenthesis, and that should be good to go, hitting enter. And my standard error, as suspected, is smaller than my standard deviation because I divided it by something, a number greater than 1, right? Okay, now the last steps are pretty straightforward. The 95% confidence interval increment, that's my term for it, is simply the standard error multiplied by 1.96, which is the value that we use if we want a 95% confidence interval. If we want some other interval, like an 85% confidence interval, we'd use a different number. But we're going to keep things simple. We're just going to worry about the 95% confidence interval here. So in order to calculate that, got my equal sign. 1.96 is our magic number. Don't be confused by the fact that our standard deviation also happens to come out somewhere close to that. That's not what I'm putting in here. This is a statistical value. It's going to correspond to the results of a t-test for alpha equals 0.05. Okay, so I got my 1.96, my statistical value multiplied by, so that's what the asterisk is, the standard error. Boom. So I got 1.96 times C10. And that gives me, for my example, 1.725, blah, blah, blah. All right, and then the last step is to use this. I'm going to both add it and subtract it from the average in order to find the range around the average where I'm fairly confident that the true mean of that group would lie. So again, pretty simple math. For my lower confidence interval, I'm going to do equals. I'm going to click on the cell with the average in it, which for me is C7, minus, which is the hyphen. It's up by the 0 key on my keyboard. And then I'm going to subtract that 95% confidence interval increment. So for me, it's equals C7 minus C11. And then I can hit enter on that. So that should be a number that's somewhat smaller than your average number. So I want to make this a little bigger so you can see it. 60. There we go. And it is. So the lower confidence limit should always be below your average value. And then my upper one is going to be kind of the opposite of that. So equals, clicking on my average, and then the plus sign. And then again, I'm clicking on the increment. Be careful not to click on your lower confidence limit value here. So make sure you're going back to the increment and you're adding that to your average. Otherwise, weird things might happen. All right, so my confidence interval, my 95% confidence interval for my group of old patients is going to be that their survival ranges between 95.7 about and 99.1. So presumably if we gave this drug to the whole population of old people, the mean survival value for that group would lie within that range. All right, so you might think we have to go through all that again for the young group if you're not an Excel pro already, and I will tell you that no, we do not need to go through all that again. So Excel has a nice feature where it lets us move formulas around, and it recalculates based on what cells are in the same relative position to the original cells were in with respect to where you typed the formula. I think there's probably a much easier way of saying that. What I want to do here is I want to highlight all of my statistics, and if you look really carefully in the bottom right hand corner of where you just highlighted, there's a tiny little box. And if you get your cursor positioned over it just right, the cursor kind of changes shape. So mine goes from a fat crosshair to a finer crosshair. That's how I know I'm over it. And then I just click and drag sideways. And now that just calculated all those same statistics for my young patients. And that is how we compute those. There'll be another video about how to interpret the confidence intervals and then how to make the graph. So there you have it. Hopefully that was helpful.